Welcome back to another Monster Hunter build. Like a lot of you, I have been obsessed with Monster Hunter World again ever since the Monster Hunter Wilds trailer dropped. I was ready to expand my hunting horn arsenal and picked one based on everyone's favorite toaster, the Teostra. But just like some hunts, things did not go quite to plan. Now gear up, eat your favorite meal, and let's jump in. My Datura horn was feeling a little bit lonely, so I picked another of my favorites, Teostra's Tiple, or Tiple if you preferred the anglicized pronunciation. I don't want to pick favorites, so in this video we're going to call it the Tiptoe. Toaster is a formidable foe who's been in a lot of the Monster Hunter games. He can fly, set you on fire, do blast damage, and take swipes at you with his tail and claws. Even his small attacks can really hurt. As with most sculptures, I started with a bronze wire skeleton. I twisted the two wires together to make a more solid structure and gave the tinfoil something to cling on to. I left the two arms bare for now because I wasn't quite sure how I was going to build the arms. If I were to do this again, I probably would have done the neck and each arm separately and connected them together later. Let's get a nice clay skin on there, just enough to make a proper texture and shape, but not so much that it gets really heavy. It took me a while to get the neck squared off. Usually I would just lay it on the table, roll, and cut, but since this is curved and on an armature, we have to do it the hard way. One bake later and we can sand it to get even crisper lines. If I were to do this again, I would have used a texture tool on it before baking. Now that things are smooth, let's get the Tiptoe's top on. If this was a violin, I'd call it a scroll, but I'm not sure what it would be called in this case. Before baking again, let's cut out the battlements. This is such a weird shape to hold, but luckily I have this round plastic case that my circle cutters came in, which was perfect for stabilizing it in my hand. To make the ridge on the back, I rolled and cut a strip, then attached it with liquid Sculpey. I used my mini angel tool to blend the strip to the neck. Let's not forget Toaster's wings. I cut little triangles and squashed them on. Now for the fun part. When I say fun, I mean repetitive and time-consuming. There are these gorgeous organic hexagon scales all over the horn, so I did a smart. I'm creating the texture in this sheet of clay so I can bake it, then make a cylinder of clay and roll it all over the texture, then bake that and have a lovely reusable hexagon scale roller. The idea is that the time to make the texture roller would be less than the time to carve hexagons all over the horn.
It was at this moment that he knew. He f***ed up.
Yeah. I may have done a smart, but I also had the dumbs. You can't roll a texture on baked clay, and adding more clay on top would ruin the proportions. So I resigned myself to my fate, plopped on the couch with a nice YouTube video and a cozy blanket, and spent too much time and so many hand cramps carving more hexagons. Once that was over, I started on the midsection. I got this little wire bezel cutter from Temu, and while it's not perfect for very small things, it's honestly not bad for the price. I created a hexagonal base around the neck and cut little sections of the triangles to make the molding. This part always reminds me of crown molding. If I were to do this again, I would remind myself that hexagons are the motif and not squares. I was a little overzealous with the heat gun I was using to quick set some areas, and I toasted the tiptoe, but it's not too bad and I didn't melt the pattern. Now for the legs. I coated the wires in clay and smoothed it into shape. Ah, look how easy that was. 90% of the work is done. I just have to fix a couple lines and we're good. The roller was definitely a time saver, and it might come in handy if I ever need this pattern again. A roll for each of the other sides and a bit of we don't have to watch this again magic, and we have legs. I cut some more battlements and added them to the midsection, then tackled the bottom bit. I made a foil structure so this piece would stay curved during baking, and I cut the base shape. The top part is thick, so I took that opportunity to wedge it in place. I'm going to take it out again to carve the tiptoe's toe tips, but this way it will have a perfect fit when I finally glue it together. To carve the little toes, I dug out my jeweler's saw. It's surprisingly awesome on baked Sculpey, and the result is much more successful than trying to make cuts when the clay is squishy and try to keep everything straight. To make the notches a little wider, I used my rectangular file. My lack of counting disturbs me. It's supposed to have 6 toes, not 5. Lucky for you, I made one off-screen and you don't have to watch that all again. On to happier things, it's finally time for the details in the middle. I rolled a sheet of clay out super thin and rubbed it with a little liquid Sculpey. This way, when I cut really tiny strips for the detail, I don't have to struggle to make it stick. Apparently, Teostra has very fashionable striped pants. That's when tragedy struck. My toaster oven must have been jealous that I was giving my attention to a different toaster and toasted my horn to oblivion. Halfway through the bake, something went haywire and it shot up to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, 176 Celsius, which was enough to bubble and melt bits of the horn. The traitor toaster was unceremoniously tossed into the wilds, never to be seen again. While waiting for my new toaster, I fixed the melted bits with fresh clay and I made the grip. I really like that part of this design. It's very functional. Obviously, it's pretty unrealistic to swing around a giant instrument and dropkick it into monsters' faces, but if it were realistic, it would be great to have a grip here for stability when you're slinging songs. My new toaster arrived, so I toasted my toaster's tiptoe and glued it to the bottom part. Time for the painting! I started like I usually do, with the base color, and my plan was to put a dark wash on it to sink into the scale texture, but the lines are so small that the base paint filled up the lines completely. It just turned into a flat slab. So I flipped things around. I wiped off the red and started with a deep purple wash. My hope was that doing the purple first, then dry brushing really thin layers of red on top, I could get the look I was going for. It actually worked pretty well. There were parts where I couldn't really dry brush well, like between the stripes, but lots of thin layers did the trick. To make it less flat and have more variation, I got a brighter red and did the same thing. Now the horn is vibrant, with the dark purple and red making little shadows. To make it really pop, I pulled out my red Citadel wash and went lightly over the whole thing. All the colors show through, but it makes it feel a little more like a juicy hide and less like clay with paint. If you zoom in really close, the highlights on the scales are kind of golden. So to make this really pop, I took one of the smallest brushes I had and gave them a touch of sparkle, like the sparkles toaster gives off when he's about to ruin your day. If you saw my cell phone jail video, then you know what this is. It's my new favorite paint. I won't lie to you, I was thrilled when I took some shots in-game and realized that there's a very subtle color shift in the scales from red to purple as it moves around. You can also see it in the toaster fight if you're not too busy dodging for your life. I didn't want to go overboard, so I painted a thin layer and wiped some away to make it more subtle. I painted on the gold for details in small, thin layers to build up the opacity. Usually I base metallics in black, but my hands were a little shaky that day and I didn't trust myself not to make a mess with the black. The gold is so much more forgiving to clean up. At this point, I realized I'd missed some sculpting. I'm going to blame my forgetfulness on the trauma of the toaster mishap. At first, I tried to paint the details on, but it wasn't great. Off camera, I sculpted a little back plate to glue on. There are some small gaps between the new plate and the old sculpt, but I can't just fill them with clay since I can't rebake it. To get around this, I used UV resin to fill the gaps, then sanded everything smooth and painted it over so it wasn't noticeable. Now for the part I've been dreading. This wire is perfect for the strings, but I knew that placing these was going to be more complicated than it seemed. I used UV resin to attach them since my usual superglue sometimes dries white. It was really hard to keep the tension on the wires to keep them parallel to each other and also curved on the neck. The shape of the instrument also made it hard to hold the wire, the tiptoe, and the flashlight, so there's not a lot of footage since I had to be in some contorted positions I couldn't film. If I had to do it again, I'd make the bridge higher since the wires don't have that nice sharp bend. When it was all done, I did not like it. The legs that looked fine in the sculpt looked so dinky in the final colors, and the strings are completely slanted, ruining the illusion of a stringed instrument. I studied it from every angle to see if there was a quick fix, at least for the strings, or maybe some good angles for photos, but it just wasn't working. So if I were going to do it again, I'd do it again. Cue the make everything again, only faster, cause I'm trying to commit to a schedule this year and don't want to fail in the first month montage. Since it's all the same work all over again, let's just chat. I really do love this game. My partner and I play it and we love to go on hunts together. It's a great game for when you have a bit of time after work, but not enough to pick up Baldur's Gate, you know? We try to coordinate our loadouts and palico tools, and it's really fun to get ready together in camp. I'm a big fan of buffing and healing, so the horn really made sense for me in that way, but it's also the slowest weapon I've ever used in any game. Typically, I prefer fast weapons with less damage, but more chances to hit and react. With the slow weapons, I feel like I never time it just right and I end up getting smacked in the middle of a slow, long attack. What weapon styles do you usually like? What's your main? Let me know in the comments. Overall, this project was really interesting. I pushed myself to create things faster than I normally would have, and now I know what to look out for and where I might rush things too much. It's mostly any part that involves waiting, like baking or paint drying. If you enjoyed this wild ride of a project, please consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one, and if you're a Monster Hunter World player, let me know your favorite weapons. I'll see you around next month with another video game inspired project. See you then!